This episode is brought to you by Hired.com. Searching for a new job can feel stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles that you don't actually want, and job boards make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. Sometimes you go all the way through an interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary offer or company culture doesn't match what you're looking for. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. We make your job search faster, focused, and stress-free. Instead of endlessly applying to companies and hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of when and how you connect with compelling new opportunities. After completing one simple application, top employers apply to hire you. On Hired, you receive personalized interview requests and upfront salary information so you can make informed decisions about which opportunities to pursue over a condensed timeline. Throughout the process, your dedicated talent advocate will have your back, providing unbiased career coaching to help you put your best foot forward with potential employers. Hired offers access to 4,000 plus innovative employers, including big brands such as Facebook and smaller emerging startups. The size and type of company you want to connect with is totally up to you. We help people find new opportunities in 17 major cities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Open to relocation? Let us know. Your privacy and autonomy in your job search is of utmost importance to us. That's why Hired hides your profile from your current and past employers. The best part is it's always free for you to find your next job on Hired, no exceptions. We pay you to get hired. Today's listeners can earn double our normal $1,000 hiring bonus by signing up with the show's link. That's right, earn $2,000 for finding your next chapter on Hired. Visit hired.com/reactnativeradio to learn more. This episode is brought to you by dailydrip.com. Daily Drip makes keeping up to date on programming skills easier. You already know how much time it takes to find good resources and learn new languages. What if the hard part of that was already done for you? Sign up for Daily Drip and pick a topic that you want to learn about. Want to learn React Native? How about Elm? Maybe you want to brush up on your CSS and HTML. Every weekday, you'll get a short video or reading delivered to you via email. The best part is it only takes 5 minutes a day. We have a special coupon code just for React Native Radio listeners. If you sign up using the coupon code RNRadio, all one word, you'll save $9 on your first month, which means you can try out the React Native topic for free. Don't forget to use the coupon code RNRadio to show support for our podcast. Make learning part of your daily routine with dailydrip.com. Hello and welcome to episode 53 of React Native Radio. Today on our panel we have Gant Laborde.
Hello.
And me, your host, Nader Dabit. Today on our show we have a special guest, and his name is Max Stoiber. And if you've been keeping up with React lately and kind of a lot of the open source projects and the conferences and things like that, you've probably seen him out there. He's created a library called Styled Components, as well as contributed to a bunch of other open source projects, and has spoken at a few conferences recently and will be at ReactConf 2017. So Max, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So I guess before we kind of get into the topic, do you mind giving everyone a kind of introduction to yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm Max. I am from Austria, which is in Europe. That is not Australia. There's no kangaroos in Austria. You'd be surprised how often that comes up, by the way. Often when I meet people and I say, hey, I'm from Austria, they go, oh, good day, mate. How are the kangaroos? And I'm like, there's no kangaroos where I'm from. I'm sorry. But we have lots of mountains. So I'm from Vienna. I make a bunch of open source, and I work at a company called ThinkMill, which is confusingly based in Sydney, Australia. Which doesn't make
that
things
must
easy.
lead to a lot of confusion.
Yes, exactly. I work there as an open source developer, and I take care of a bunch of open source projects, including Keystone, React Boilerplate, Microanalytics, and a bunch of others you might have heard of.
And you work with Jed Watson.
Exactly. He's my boss, yeah. So he's one of the co-owners of ThinkMill together with Boris. And yeah, they basically run the company from Sydney.
Great. I'd like to take that second out to just say how awesome of a person Jed is. We used to have him as a panelist on the show a while back, and he's just a great guy to work with. So yeah, that's awesome.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. I'm in love with Jed, basically. If I didn't have a girlfriend, well, I guess he has a wife now.
That's great.
I'm not going to finish that sentence, but I really liked it.
So you basically get paid to work on open source projects. That's like the dream.
Yes, basically. I'm not going to complain.
So what projects are you kind of involved with right now?
Right now, I'm spent most of my time on styled components and another unannounced project, which I'm not going to talk about. Hint, hint. And then I also still maintain React boilerplate, and that's mostly it. I spend a tiny bit of time on Keystone, but right now my main focus is on styled components.
So is that repo at github.com/unannounced project?
I wish. No, I'm not going to tell you that repo yet, but you're gonna hear it when it's out.
Okay, cool. So I guess since this is a React Native show, we're going to be talking a lot about open source projects. Actually, that's going to be the topic and how to create and maintain a successful one. But styled components can be used with React Native, right?
Yes. So we built styled components out of a need for ourselves. So we at ThinkMill make a Elemental UI, which is a component library, third-party component library for web apps. And we use it in Keystone.js. And we've noticed that theming third-party components is really, really hard. And we currently use less, which is a bit of a pain to set up for users. And so we wanted to switch to some sort of inline style CSS and JS method to solve that pain. But as it turns out, there is none which solved our specific problem, which is theming. So we worked a bit, we literally tried every single one you've heard of. And we just realized that there was none that really did what we wanted it. And that's kind of partly where styled components came from. And then we realized that we built lots of React Native apps at ThinkMill, and we realized that it would be nice to style all our applications the same way, right? You don't want to switch between different methods of styling just because you switch between different platforms. And so not only we made styled components compatible with third-party component libraries, we also made it compatible with React Native, and we're going to work on even more frameworks and that sort of thing soon. So expect React VR and maybe maybe we'll work on compatibility with Ember and Angular too, maybe, depending on how stable styled components is.
So when you created styled components, I guess who was using it then and who is using it now, and where do you see that project going in the future?
So styled components originally came from me meeting Glenn Madden, who is the co-creator of styled components. He's also the co-creator of CSS modules. And I met him when I was down in Australia. And we talked about this whole CSS thing for a while. And we both realized that we needed to build something else. The main reason for which is that CSS modules, which is a great solution, is not compatible with Create React App. And that's a big, big hurt because everybody now uses Create React App. And so one of the other explicit goals of styled components is to be Create React App compatible. And so Glenn showed me a prototype of what was going to become styled components. And it was horrible. It was a good first iteration, but it was horrible. It was really far from what styled components is now. And then we basically riffed off of each other and made this really nice API, which is easy to use and just makes sense. And is sort of coherent with itself. And yeah, that's basically where styled components came from. And then we were obviously the first ones to use it. But by now, a bunch of companies all around the world use it for their apps in production, both on the web and on React Native.
That's really cool. It feels really good to know when people are kind of using your project, right?
Yeah, it really does. That's basically the main reason why I do open source, right? It's just people actually use the things you build.
So Max, let me ask you, for those of us who haven't heard of styled components, can you give us the 30-second elevator pitch just so that way people who are late to the party can kind of catch up?
Yeah, definitely. I probably should have mentioned that. Sorry. So styled components is a library for styling your React applications, including React Native and React for web. What makes it special and different from many other libraries is that there's two weird things about it, basically. The first one is that it removes the mapping between styles and components. So instead of having assignable class names or a style prop or anything, you create components that are styled. There's no way to create a tag that isn't styled. And then the other thing that's a bit weird about it is that it lets you write actual CSS in JavaScript. Those two things combined make for a great development experience, and they also enforce good practices in your component system. Because what I've noticed building lots of React applications is that very often I only ever use one class name once, right? I build lots of tiny components, like, for example, a button. And then I have a button class name, and I only ever use that once for my button, right? for the simple reason that if I change the button class name, that should not change anything else in the entire app, right? That wouldn't make any sense. That should only ever affect the button. And so why do we even have class names at all? If we only ever use them once, we can just as well get rid of them and that way avoid bugs that could haunt us. And it also automatically at the same time enforces the container component split a bit, because styles are now tied to a simple tiny component that can't do anything except render an HTML tag. You have to have components and you have to have containers, or you have to have smart components and you have to have dumb components. There's no way around it. And so styled components, essentially, the elevator pitch is that it enforces best practices in your component-based system without being a huge pain.
Very nice. Anything that says styles without being a huge pain is automatically got a positive in my book. So
yeah. Like, so when Glenn first showed me this, I should probably mention this as well. When Glenn first showed me this first iteration of styled components, I thought it was the worst idea ever, right? I looked at it and it just looks really weird, right? It's really unusual. And I looked at it and thought, nah, this is horrible. Why would anybody ever use this? But then I tried it, right? Because I wanted to like chime in with how we could make it better. And so I tried it and I went, wait a second, there's some actually good ideas in here. And as it turns out, as we've refined the API more and more and more, it's actually become amazing to work with. Like the sole reason I go and talk about styled components is because I want everybody to use it. Not because I particularly care about everybody using my project, but just because I've not found a project which gives me a better development experience, right? It's just such a pleasure to use.
Max, can you tell us a little bit about how that magic happens behind the scenes, sort of from like a high-level overview?
Yeah, so styled components uses a new ES6 JavaScript feature called tagged template literals. So since ES6, since the new version of JavaScript, you can you can call functions with backticks. So you can write function, and then instead of doing parentheses, you can do backtick. And that will also call the function. But basically, instead of, so if you call a function with parentheses and then pass in a string, right? And you have interpolations in that string with a template literal, those would just get too stringified. So if you have an object, instead of getting like a JSON stringified object, what you'll get is object, like the old square bracket, object, closed square bracket, which is really annoying. And so by using tagged template literals, the function gets past the strings, but it also gets past each and every single interpolation that you have individually. And instead of stringifying it, we can then take it and do something with it, which allows us to implement these features like adapting based on props with functions, interpolating objects, interpolating arrays, and that sort of thing. I hope that just made sense. It's kind of a bit hard to explain without seeing code, but I think if you look at the repo and take a look at the code samples, you'll get what I mean.
No, that makes sense. I mean, it helps out a lot as far as kind of understanding what goes behind the scenes. So that's really good. But I guess I'm also kind of curious. Was it something that you built that was automatically like could be used with React Native, or was that extra work that had to be put into the project?
So there is a bit of extra work because the primitives in React Native are different, right? So we export these primitives, which you can use like style.div and style.button and style.h1. But those obviously don't exist on React Native. Instead, you have to have style.view and style.text and that sort of thing, right? So there is a tiny bit of different code, but I would say 95% of the code base is the exact same.
So you're able to basically, I guess, there's only one library you have to install on either platform. If you're on React or React Native, you just still install, styled components, and then it just works, right?
Yeah. So the only thing that you have to do differently on React Native is import styled from styled components /native, which will give you access to the React Native primitives.
So when you are using this in React Native, are there any caveats or differences that a user might have to think about before getting started?
There is one question which comes up sometimes, which is, even in React Native, we let you write CSS syntax. So you don't write styles as object, you write actual CSS syntax. But even though on the web this is actual CSS, on React Native, we make that be React Native styles. So you cannot write actual CSS, you still have to write React Native styles, except with the CSS syntax, if that makes any sense.
Oh, totally. Cool. So now in React Native, we have access to stuff like dimensions, to be able to grab the width and height. Are those things that you can pass in as a function to a styled component? Are there any weird things, like if you want to use like external values in a style? Is there anything that would stop a user from being able to access stuff like the width and height?
No, totally not. So you can pass a property to a styled component, and that will get passed to every function that you interpolate into the styles, and you can just access the props from there. What's currently still unsolved on React Native, what we're working on though, is that there is for certain components in React Native, there is styles which you need to apply to different props. So right now, whenever you write a styled component, all the styles get applied to the style prop. But I can't think of an example on the top of my head, but there are certain components which take styles to different props. So I can't remember what
a tab icon tint color, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you cannot do that with styled components right now, but we're thinking about how we can introduce an API to do that without messing up how it works, basically. So we're hopefully going to solve that soon. I think that's pretty much the only real caveat there is when using styled components, that you still have to use properties for some things like the tint color. But we're working on it, and we'll hopefully have it figured out soon.
That's awesome. That's awesome news. It's exciting for me to watch you all progress and make this a more robust library, even for stuff like React Native.
Yeah, so we're actually currently working pretty hard on version 2. That's why the release has sort of slowed down a bit. And version 2 is going to be almost the exact same, except that we rewrote the entire CSS parser. So now the pack still have the same features, and we'll also have proper SSR support, and we'll hopefully have figured out how to do that in React Native. So version 1 was sort of very much of a first version, right? We built it, we used it in our own projects, and then put it out there and got real world usage. And now version 2 gets all of the feedback that we got and makes it work for every single use case. That's sort of the plan.
Awesome. So for anybody out there listening that's interested in doing some open source work, styled components can make use of a better server-side support and better React Native support too, right? Did I miss anything, Max?
No, that's exactly it. There's a bunch of open issues with interesting discussions about APIs and anything. So we'd be happy to have you chime in with your thoughts.
So when you are using server-side rendering, is there anything special you have to do with Webpack to get that working correctly? Like I know in a traditional scenario, you might have like simple universal loader or use like extract HTML text plugin or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about how this server rendering may work in the future?
So server-side rendering is really interesting because styled components inject styles into the head of the document. And at the same time, it only injects the styles that you actually use, right? It only injects styles of components that you render, which means that if you server-side render, there's nothing special you need to do except put the style tags into your HTML. That's what we're adding an API for. But what you get for free is only critical CSS. So only the CSS that's actually used on the page that the user is requesting will be sent down. And also, it'll be super fast, of course. And there's nothing special you need to do with Webpack.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. I hate to diverge from React Native, but one last question about the web. So are you saying that on every page load, you're only getting the CSS required for a specific component?
Yes. So for it, we only ever inject CSS that you actually use. So let's say a user requests the /about page and you server-side render that, then you only ever inject the styles that are needed for the components on the about page and not also the styles that are needed for the /home page and the /login page and the app itself and whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, totally. That's super cool and valuable.
Yeah, so it's not something we advertise right now in the README because server-side rendering isn't fully done yet. It's almost done, but not fully done. But we're going to do that, and it's hopefully become more obvious as we advertise that and go talk to people.
That's super cool. Do you think you'll ever find yourself in a position where you can compose components from either React Native or React? Let's say you do have this button component, and you want to start. Your company's getting to the size where you want to start reusing some things, maybe a little more than a traditional company, may ask you to reuse. Do you think there's a way, or maybe in the future, an ability to be able to spit out a web version of a button and a React Native version of a button with styled components?
So that's an interesting question. The answer is yes and no. For the reason that the component that we spit out on React Native has to be different from the component that we spit out on the web. For the simple reason that there is things on React Native like set native props, and that we need to do inline style instead of just normal DOM injection, which means that we can't use the exact same code for outputting a component on the web and on React Native. The thing is that the React Native packager has this great feature, which I don't know if it's documented yet, but it has this great feature of the .ios.js and .android.js postfix for files. So if you have, for example, a button folder which contains an index.js with your button for the web, you can just create an index.ios.js file which contains the button for the iOS file. And the thing is, you can do that without styled components too. But because with styled components, it forces you to have this container component split. Your containers almost cannot contain web primitives, and then your components are tiny. So rewriting your button for React Native is like, 15 lines of code maybe, because the only thing you really have to write is the styles, and that's it. Which means that with styled components, it's really easy to write universal applications. You can basically share 95% of the code, basically all the business logic, except for the styling.
That makes sense. And all those, everything that you brought up is just the nature of the beast that we're working with right now.
Yeah, exactly. So there's hardly nothing we can do to make truly universal components with styled components, because the primitives are different and because the styling language is different. But we make it as easy as possible to write universal applications.
Awesome. Gant, Nader, do you have I know I've sort of hijacked the podcast. You guys are
No, it's been very interesting to hear, actually.
Yeah, it seems like there's always a natural gravitation of take a look at what React does, right? I mean, what we're seeing here with React and React Native is that you've got web developers building mobile applications. And so it seems like there's a natural draw to continue to amend the differences between the two and treat them as almost different platforms. You see that inside of Packager slightly as well. Which works across all the platforms. And it seems like this is just sort of like where our conversation keeps going, right? We're all trying to hit these API differences between all these different parts and just really distill it down to where is it going to have to be different, and what can we do about that to make it even better? So I think that we're seeing that more and more. And so I'm kind of excited. It's coming up to that time again where people are going to start announcing things, and I imagine we should probably see quite a bit of movement on that front. And also, I'm excited to see, exactly what Max might announce. Who knows?
So the thing is, React was born out of this need for so before React, we had Cordova and PhoneGap and those sort of things, which lets you write code once and run it on all the platforms. The problem with that is that it doesn't really work. You can share a lot of code, but there is platform-specific differences in how the user interface works or how certain things animate or what they look like. And so React goes against that by doing learn once, write anywhere, right? So you learn React for the web or React for native, but then you can also write the other one. It doesn't, by learning the paradigms that make React, you can now build web applications, native applications, VR applications, and terminal applications and hardware applications, and all this wide spectrum of renderers, while only really learning things once, and then adapting the primitives. But that's easy. And so styled components very much takes that and makes it even easier by just literally making the only thing you have to do differently the styling and maybe a tiny bit of behavior.
Well said.
So I guess this will kind of lead into the next topic. What is the main kind of, as far as building this exact project that we're talking about now, style components, what were some of the hurdles or roadblocks that you kind of faced, and kind of how did you overcome those? And is that something that you typically see in normal open source projects?
So there's always a bit of a gap between the things that you imagine working and the things that actually work, right? That's where development happens. Because if everything worked the way you imagined it the first time, robots could do that, right? There's nothing special about it. But so the first iteration of style components that Glenn built had this thing where instead of writing actual CSS, you composed CSS rules out of functions, which doesn't make sense if I say it like that. But essentially, you would call a function called font size and pass in the value that you wanted the rule to have, which was really bonkers. We hit the roadblock when we realized that for every component that you wrote, you would need to import all of those rules that you wanted to use, which was just not a very good development experience. And then we thought, so we want style components is universal, right? We want it to work everywhere and for everybody. But the issue with existing, or with many of the existing, or most of the existing styles and JavaScript solutions was that they had you write styles as objects, similar to how React Native does it. The issue is that means your designers, for example, cannot write styles anymore, right? They can't, because they might know CSS, but requiring them to know how JSON works is a bit far. And so we thought maybe we could do this thing where we could let you write actual CSS and then just take the CSS that you write and just put it into the head of the DOM. And that sounded like a great idea, right? Just, because when you write actual CSS, we could more or less just take it and put it into the head of the DOM of the document. But then we hit another roadblock, which is that with styled components, your CSS doesn't look like CSS, right? Because you don't have any selectors, because you don't have any class names, and you can write media queries and nesting, we do need to do a bit of parsing and pre-processing before we inject it into the document. So we thought, okay, that, writing a CSS parser, that can't be hard. We'll just write our own one and it'll be tiny and super fast and it's super easy. And then we realized that writing a CSS parser is actually neither easy nor fast. And it's actually really hard. And so what we did was we took PostCSS, which is normally a node package, vended it into styled components and removed all the node dependencies and all the node code, and essentially made PostCSS work in the browser, which is pretty crazy. And so that's how styled components works right now. All of the CSS is parsed with PostCSS and then injected into the head of the document. The issue is that PostCSS does a bunch of stuff which we, for the styled components use case, really don't need. For example, it creates an AST. It creates an abstract syntax tree before stringifying that again to inject it into the DOM, which is totally unnecessary for our use case, right? We don't do anything with the AST. We don't do any AST manipulation, so there's no need for us to generate one. So for the second version, we have a contributor called Thai Sultan, who wrote his own CSS parser, which is super tiny and super fast. And so for the second version, that is why the next release will be a major version release. We're switching to that, which will mean that the package size will decrease by half and it'll be much faster and all of that sort of nice thing. And that's kind of what we wanted to do from the start, but we just couldn't get it done in time for launch, really, because writing your own CSS parser is a lot more work than it might sound. And so now we're really happy to have Thai Sultan help us out and write this really tiny, really fast CSS parser that works exactly like we need it to. If I may mention something that's more general, I've noticed that open source projects, which sustain the longest, are open source projects that solve a problem that the maintainers have. So basically, all of my open source projects were born out of my own needs. I realized I had a problem, and I solved that problem. And then I thought, well, I could generalize this and make it, public. And that's basically where all of my open source projects come from. And I think that's something that people who are not yet contributing to open source are missing, right? But the thing is, every developer, if you're a developer, you are solving problems, right? That's what developers do. That's what we do all day long. And so in reality, if you're solving problems, you have things to open source, right? Whatever problem you solve. Now, many of the problems you solve might be very domain specific and specific to the app that you're building, but some of them could also be more general and could help other people. And if you've been thinking about how can I start contributing to open source, generalizing some of the problems you solve and pushing them up to GitHub and NPM is a great start. Because even if nobody uses your things, you haven't lost anything, right? You just made it more general and pushed it up to GitHub. So the worst thing that happens is it looks good on your CV and on your GitHub page. The best thing that can happen is that you solve other people's problems. I have big open source projects, right? Like React Boilerplate, which now has almost 12,000 stars on GitHub and is used by companies all around the world, or Start Components, which has 4,000 something stars and is, also used by companies all around the world. And that's what people know me for. But what people don't know me for is the bajillion tiny utility open source projects that I have on GitHub that don't benefit anybody except for me, right? There's a bunch of projects on GitHub. If you look on my GitHub page, I have something like 200 repositories, and most of them are just tiny solutions to problems that I had. And none of them are used by anybody or by many people, which is fine because I use them, right? I need them. But some of them become popular and they help other people write their applications. And that just feels amazing, right? Sorry for this sort of total derail of the conversation, but that just jumped into my mind.
Actually, what you're talking about right here is pretty key in it, is that you said it feels amazing. And I think that that's like a big part of it, right? There needs to be a pride, and there needs to be like people who you can connect with who say thank you for this. So you have to know that you actually have some kind of efficacy on what's going on in the open source world. And so I think that that's kind of like one of the things I've seen with Nader as well, is that you want to do this, but you want to make sure that, like, as you're helping people, they're actually getting what you're doing, and that in its own self is a reward.
Yeah,
absolutely. And on top of that too, I like that you mentioned all the small, tiny components that you've sort of open sourced on your own over the years. I think sometimes people think open source is something that you kind of have or you don't have, right? You either have the time or the skills to do it, or you don't. But I think it's the progression of building muscle memory over years of just open sourcing things. And then you just happen to find a group of folks that have the same common problems as you do. And then that makes open sourcing even easier. But you don't just, that muscle memory takes some time to, develop, right? So you can open source one thing today and then maybe put yourself down like, oh, it didn't get 10,000 stars overnight or whatever. Or you can continue just open sourcing your things, building your craft, getting better at it. And then, and then you'll end up just finding, a common group of people, right? If you need that motivation, right? If it's about, Max, like you were saying, strictly solving problems, then it shouldn't be, then whether or not you have stars shouldn't be the issue. It's just whether or not you're solving problems that other people have.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. For me right now, when I work on something and I don't open source it, it feels really weird. Just because it's such a default for me by now. So when I work on things that aren't open source, I'm like, this feels weird. Nobody can see this. That's unusual. I mean, it's sort of just a thing that's happened over the years as I've open sourced more and more things. It just happens, right? It's just a thing that the first time I published an NPM package, I had huge trouble, right? I was like, how does this ever work? Nobody's ever going to be able to use this because it's obviously like, how do I do this? But by now, publishing an NPM module is like second nature, right? I just do it. It's not something I even most of the time not even think about, right? And that just comes with, as you do it more and more, you just notice the patterns and sort of internalize them, as you said.
One thing I noticed when I first started getting into open source and the idea of like creating my own things was that I started uploading, like you said, like these tiny little things, like maybe just, it was almost basically a function that I've been using over and over that solved the problem for me. And I would upload these little things, and I noticed that people started finding them and storing them. And it wasn't like, thousands, but it was, dozens, which to me was like amazing, like that anybody was looking at it at all. And it kind of gave me the confidence to actually create a real open source project. And I think it's kind of like the first step. Either contributing to someone else's or just throwing up a little thing is like the first step, in my opinion, of how I gained, I guess, the confidence to kind of, put more of my stuff out there. And it kind of snowballed into where now I feel, I guess the first time I did it, I thought someone or people were going to like read and criticize my code. And it was kind of, that was one of the main things that kind of stop me from doing it. But so far, I've really not seen a lot of negativity at all. So that was, a really interesting thing to notice, I guess, for me.
Well, Nader, I want you to know I criticize your code every day. I just load it up on my screen and take a look. No, I mean, I think that's like one of the imposter syndrome fears that stops a lot of people is like, you're not the best at everything. And so there's always going to be somebody who can. But the truth of the matter is, just anybody kind of putting in that extra effort, where you have it built into you to put things into open source. Even like code that has bugs in it, to someone who's just getting started is like, hey, I'm super happy that this even exists, and I'm happy because I'm here to fix it with you or for you. Because those of us who have had open source projects in their infancy without a lot of tests, it's actually been better received early on, with people can kind of get in and help out. And then, it's almost like once it gets enough traction, you get a little bit more of the people who are lurking around, or, might use the code, but you'll never actually see them do anything until they need to file an issue. So, I mean, I feel like, I don't know if developers are just a special kind of community or if this is just people in general, but it's a real kind of like awesome community driven thing. And I'm really surprised. It's part of the reason why it's so great to be on this podcast with all y'all, because I get to actually speak with more people like this that have that same sort of burst of oxytocin by talking and working and building things with one another.
So I made React Boilerplate. This is sort of a tiny anecdote. I made React Boilerplate mostly for myself because I built my first few React projects, and I realized I'd done the same setup like every single time. And so I figured, okay, I might as well put that into its own folder. And then I thought, well, if I put it into its own folder, it's not going to stay very clean very long. So you know what? I'm just going to push it up to GitHub, really just for myself, right? I didn't even write a lot of documentation. And then I worked, I updated it every now and then when I started a new project. And it sort of gained, maybe 50 stars, right? But those first 50 stars felt amazing because that's 50 people that have taken time out of the day to look at something that I made for myself and thought, hey, this is actually useful. Like, this is something I might or might not use one day. And so they started, right? And that just felt amazing. And then that's unrelated. But then one day I woke up and React Boilerplate went from like 70 stars to 500 stars literally overnight. And I had no idea what happened. And that was like 2 days after Christmas. And for the next 3 days, basically, I was in 100% freak out mode. I was so excited because somebody suddenly, like hundreds and then thousands of people had started a project that I made and downloaded and used it. And it just like, that gave me such a good feeling, right? It's just an amazing feeling of knowing that people use something you make.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, it's almost addictive in itself to work on that. So I guess you had no idea how you went from 50 or 70 stars to 500. Is there any sort of like lessons learned now that you're kind of continuing open source more and more and more about how to get traction early on and get focus on something that you're working on?
Hacker News. That's how React Boilerplate got big. Somebody posted on Hacker News and it went to the front page and stayed there for half a day, basically. And at the end of it, it had like 2,000, 3,000 stars. What people often don't see is that, they maybe post their things on Reddit or on, Designer News or that sort of thing. But all of those communities are tiny compared to Hacker News. Hacker News, even though it has like, when you look at it, it sort of has less upvotes under, air quotes. The amount of people that lurk Hacker News is insanely high. And it gets even better because all of those people, or at least the big chunk of those people, is technically interested. And then another big chunk of those people are developers or are related to developers, right? And so having one's project on Hacker News is an incredibly good way to get it in front of people. Now, getting your project on Hacker News and getting it on the front page is its own mystery, right? I have no idea how to do that. I wish I had some sort of trick or, recipe for doing that, but it just sort of happened. But when it happens, the impact it has is huge. That's basically the number one tip that I can give anybody. Share your things on Hacker News. Just because if it doesn't work out, you haven't lost anything except for maybe 5 seconds of your time. But if it works out, it's going to change the way your open source project looks and feels. And, there's going to be lots of contributions and stars and activity.
That's great advice. Nader, I'd be interested, by the way, do you have any specific go-to places for when you're releasing code?
I usually, this is more like in general thing that I do when I create something, whether it be a blog post or anything like a open source project or anything like that. I normally have like a list of things I kind of do. And this is like, I guess would be almost like marketing or whatever you would call it. Or maybe just kind of like, being, trying to get your information out there socially as a developer. But I kind of, because I'm so into the React Native community, I normally post a post on the Facebook React Native group. I'll tweet about it. I'll go to, I forgot the name of the website now, but there's a website that I go to that's all about developers and stuff. I can't remember it now. Of course, my mind just went blank. So I'll usually go to Reddit and I'll find like the Reddit subreddit that most closely applies to what I'm, talking about at the time. And I'll reach out to a few of my Slack groups and post there. I'll just do like a handful of things. And normally that's enough to get, people at least interested enough to give me some traffic. And then I'll kind of see where that goes, whether it gets really popular or if people kind of are dying off. And if it gets popular, normally people will share it and you'll see a lot of activity for a few days. And that's kind of what I do. I'll be interested in what you guys are doing too, just to be kind of get an idea.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fortunately, it's sort of the same thing. I think considering what Max has said, I'm going to put a little bit more energy into Hacker News in the future. But what's really interesting is seeing, just because, here's the thing, right? Open source needs to get a gust of wind in order to like even get off the ground. And then after that, it's whether or not it's, applicable to a lot of people or not. But if you don't get that initial sort of boost, or somebody doesn't post you on Hacker News or something like that, I think like there's just this moment where, you don't have that feedback loop where you're helping people and they're helping you back. So it's kind of key for me. One of the things that I like to do is just check any kind of link backs that you get on previous work, make a list of that, and then make sure that you can kind of try to get that stuff there. And then inevitably, next thing that you do, when you iterate, there'll be a new website or a new link back from somewhere else. And then if it looks like it's credible, friendly, and has its own kind of community, then add that to the list for the next one. And so you've got sort of like a growing list. And then hopefully, I think that, I've actually had the experience where I sent something to Hacker News and it did terribly. But then someone else about a week later from one of those other communities took it, put it on Hacker News, and maybe their verbiage was better than mine. And then it took off. So sort of like it's you can't just kind of, just like in open source, you can't just fall on your face and be scared of it. You got to kind of put it out there and then iterate.
I think this whole topic is really important because many people don't realize how important marketing is for open source.
Very true.
Just making something that's great is not going to get you anywhere in most cases. There's lots of things that tie into marketing, like being on Hacker News, but there's things that happen before then as well. Having great documentation is one of them. Having a tagline that sums up what the project is about is super important. All those things sort of tie into the whole huge topic of marketing. And if you don't, for example, if you have a project without documentation or with very limited documentation, the chances of it ever being used by anybody is really slim because nobody's going to go in and dive through the code of a project that you don't even know what it's about. Like, at least I never do that, and I don't think many people do that. And so this whole topic ties into the fact that marketing is really important for open source project.
I agree 100% with that. Hashnode, that's another thing. That's the site I was thinking about. I usually post the Hashnode. And so all of that stuff kind of together usually gets me some good traffic. But yeah, I agree about the, what you were saying about the documentation and the tagline and everything. Like if you create something really nice that people will use, but you also have that pristine documentation and a nice description and even a good name, like the name really matters. The name has to kind of normally, project something, whether it be exactly what the project does or a feeling or an emotion. It has to project something. So when someone reads that, they want to either dig deeper into what it is or actually use it. And then if you have also a decent network of people that you can kind of get the word out to, and that would also go into what you were talking about, what you do before the project is released, kind of, spending, months and years, basically getting to know people and helping them out in their open source projects and just building relationships, I guess you would say. But yeah, if you have all of those things put together and you release something, it's almost surely going to do at least, pretty good, I would say, if you have all those things in place. In fact, I've seen so many amazing plugins and open source projects out there that when I look at them, I see how much time, effort, sweat, blood, and tears you could tell that this person spent with hundreds or thousands of commits. And it's an amazing project, but no one's looking at it. And normally it's because of one of those things that we just mentioned had not been done, correctly, whether it be the documentation or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely important.
And I hope that's not a reason why people get deterred from open source, because that's a fantastic reason, Nader. Like you build a project, like you don't even have the documentation for it yet, but some people are just like looking for these stars or whatever, and if the stars don't come, it's like, well, my project is a failure. No, that's not true. It's just that maybe you need to communicate your project, a little differently to the community, right? At the very least, before moving on to the next thing.
Yeah, and I mean, as I said before, as long as you're solving your own problems, it doesn't really matter, right? At least to me, it doesn't matter. I don't make for the most part, I don't make open source projects for them to become popular, right? That's not the ultimate goal of the open source projects. The ultimate goal of the open source projects is to help other people who have the same problem as I do. And if nobody else has that problem, then nobody else has that problem, right? That's fine, because I've solved my own problem, right? I don't need other people to have that problem too.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. But I would also say that if you did have this problem, you did spend, all this time fixing it, it would be great if it was, if it was known to the public how to, I guess, get the word out about your project so people can at least look at it and see if it also helps solve their problem as well, right?
Yeah, so if nobody knows about your solution, obviously nobody's going to use it, right? Like there's how is that supposed to work?
Yeah.
So there is a certain level of, you have to do a tiny bit of writing documentation and, posting it on Twitter and that sort of thing so people know it exists, right? But even then, if nobody uses it, I don't care most of the time, right? It's like, well, I just solved my own problem. If it doesn't help anybody else.
Right,
okay.
Right. Exactly, yeah.
Totally. If you do open source for the sake of getting stars, you will not become successful, because it's like, you can apply this like taking a test at school, right? You can cheat your way and get an A on the test and completely dissolve any knowledge you had on that topic, or you could understand it and then use something else, right? You take the superficial approach, you're not getting anywhere. You're just spinning your wheels, right? My favorite example is I'm an entrepreneur, so I like to build things, right? But just because I launch my product and it's not successful on day one doesn't mean I'm giving up and moving on to the next thing. And believe it or not, I used to work with people that would think that like, oh, you release an app or whatever and it's going to blow up overnight and you become an overnight millionaire. It's like, no, that's not the case, right? And the people that thought that way are no longer entrepreneurs, because they just thought that like you either have it or you don't. You're either an overnight success or you're not. And the people that take the superficial approach are usually the ones that burn out or give up. But if you're solving problems for your own needs, right? Like you were saying, Max, it not only helps you, but it could potentially help this group of people, right? And obviously the first project that you do is going to be the hardest, no matter what, because you're doing everything on your own. Nobody knows who you are, right? Nobody knows what your product is doing, and nobody can trust your skills on using your work in a production environment, right? So once you get past that like small hump in the road, it could open the door for projects blowing up faster, or not blowing up, but just being exposed to others faster. Was that a very long-winded response? Sorry.
No worries. I liked it.
No, that was great.
It's just I gauge what I say by the silence and how long it lasts afterwards. So maybe I said too many scatterbrained things there.
Oh, no. We were all just napping. It was very interesting.
We were in deep thought.
It actually is a lot to chew on too, the way you kind of say it, because there's a fine line, where should you be focused? So yeah, it's like, I don't know, you put us into too much deep thought. Now I have a lot to think about.
What do you think about the concept of being responsible for maintaining the project after you've released it? So say you spend this time and you create something really great and a bunch of people start using it. And then a year and a half later, you kind of stop maintaining it. And a lot of people have been using it into their production applications. And now things are breaking because maybe newer versions of their OS are being released or whatever. What kind of responsibility do you guys think the developer has in maintaining something that other people are using? Or is it something like if these people are using it for free, maybe they should be submitting these fixes, and I guess that whole conversation.
So there was a great tweet on Twitter. So the most common license, for those of you who don't know, for open source projects on GitHub is the MIT license, and it's a very, very clear and short license that basically gives everybody who has the software the permission to use it for whatever they want, as long as they attribute it to you, as long as they say somewhere, hey, we're using this and this, and they can't sue you, right? You don't owe them anything, right? And there was this great tweet on Twitter by a lawyer who annotated the MIT license, and it basically the short version is, here's the part where I give you permission to use this for free, and here's the part where it says that I don't owe you shit. Essentially, I think as the creator of an open source project, it's not your responsibility to maintain it for other people. It's not your responsibility to make it work for other people. It's not your responsibility to make it work at all, really. If people want to use it, and if people have a different use case and they want to use it for their use case, you have no obligation to support them at all, right? Absolutely none at all. And I think that's something that some people don't understand, right? Because when you do open source, you get a lot of discussion, right? Especially when you have a popular project, there's lots of discussions about things that you could do or add or, make it work. But most of the time, those things don't matter to you, right? They're nothing that you need, because otherwise you would have already built it. That's not true always, but it's often true, right? And sometimes you might think, yeah, that's actually quite useful and I might actually use that, so I'll build it. But you have to be careful that you don't build things you're never going to use, or you're not going to include things that you're never going to use, because you have to maintain them, right? Because if you include something in your source code that does a thing which you don't use, people are going to complain and find bugs and have new ideas. And you're like, well, I don't actually use this, so I don't really know if I want to use this or not, right? Like how do I fix this bug? Like, and it doesn't give you a lot of confidence, basically, and it's not what I think you should be doing. That was a very long-winded rant to basically say, keep your open source project focused on your problem. And if people don't have that problem, or they have a similar problem and want that solved by your open source project, it's not your responsibility to make it work for them. They can always fork it. There's this great button on the top right corner of GitHub where it says fork, where people can just literally copy the exact project of yours and can then change it to suit their needs, right? And that's what people should do as well, instead of you including all of the things that everybody wants in your project, which you don't actually need.
Very nice.
So Max, you're fairly young, right? How old are you?
I turned 20 almost a month ago.
Okay, so you're definitely young, which is great. I'm sure a lot of people that have been keeping up with your career because you've been very vocal and open about what you've done. You had a really good blog post that was on Hacker News actually recently. What advice would you give either new developers, young developers, or even older developers that are kind of either looking to enhance and progress in their career, or people that are just now getting into programming? What advice would you give them to kind of help them understand ways that they can better themselves, I guess?
So the first piece of advice that took me a long time to understand, and that's really important, is that nobody has a fucking clue what they're doing, right? Even when you look at people like Dan Abramov or Ryan Florence or, all of those famous, under air quotes, famous people on Twitter, they have just as little idea of what they're doing as you. There is this thing called imposter syndrome. And if you've never heard of that, I highly recommend you look it up. But basically, everybody has a very narrow, just due to the nature of things, how many things you can learn, everybody has a very narrow scope of their specialization, right? Everybody knows their portion of things that they've done before and learned before. And oftentimes, because there's so many different people everywhere, it seems like everybody else knows everything and you only know a very tiny part. But in reality, you know probably just as much as everybody else about the problems you're solving, if not more, most of the time, actually. But then another person knows a part about, on the right side, and another person knows something on the left side, and, another person might know something up there. And from your perspective, it seems like everybody knows everything, right? People who know things at the top, at the right, at the left, at everywhere. When in reality, they also are very specialized and have a very specialized knowledge of the problems that they're solving. And they don't have any idea about your problems most of the time or things you're doing. And so it's really important to always remember nobody has an idea what they're doing, no matter how much it seems like it. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm learning every single day, right? And now I'm learning things that are in a totally different direction, right? There's a lot of people are very good or much better than I am at things that I do. But I try to learn as much as I can and soak up as much information as I can so I can further my own knowledge and not be intimidated by people seemingly knowing everything. And then the second piece of advice that I can give, which is kind of a bit maybe overused, but it's find your passion. And it sounds simple, right? But I did a lot of things before I arrived at web and at programming and then at web development, right? Originally, I wanted to be how do you say that in English? A pyromaniac? No, that's the wrong thing. A pyrotechnician. A pyrotechnician, right? I loved fire when I was younger, right? And I really wanted to get into chemistry and sort of get into, the nitty-gritty of, atoms and molecules and all that sort of thing. But then it just stopped interesting me after a while. And I did other things, right? I got really into Minecraft for a while, right? Which got me into computers. But then I'm all over the place. I'm a trained barista. I'm a trained skiing instructor. I do tons of things. But by doing this, I found the one thing that I am really, truly passionate about, which is web development. And specifically JavaScript development, really. That's what I do it every single day for hours on end, but not because I have to, because I want to, right? It's because I can't think of a better thing to do with my time, right? I just really, really enjoy it. And I highly encourage you, if you're a younger developer, to just go in and try as many different things as possible. Both, if you know you're passionate about programming, try different things within programming, right? Try maybe a bit of design or a bit of systems programming or a bit of being a network admin or a bit of being a web developer. It doesn't really matter, but just jump around. Or if you're not sure about programming, just try different fields, right? Try a bit of chemistry or physics or something entirely different, right? Just try a lot of things and you're going to find the thing that you're passionate about. If you don't try lots of things, you cannot find what you're passionate about, right? How is that supposed to work? It's not going to come and jump into your head like God put it there, right? You have to try things and then eventually you will find the one thing that you're passionate about. And no matter what it is, that is what you should be doing. If that's web programming or not, doesn't matter, right? Just do what you're passionate about.
Wow, that's really, really solid advice. I really liked what you were saying about the imposter syndrome and the fact that kind of no one knows what they're really doing. And I think when I finally realized that, my career also kind of took a turn for the better. It gave me just so much more confidence because I knew that it could at least kind of go out there and give it a shot And once I did that, I realized that people did learn from what I was saying, and they really enjoyed, hearing about what I had to talk about. And it kind of snowballed into the point where I'm able to get a better grasp of how to, I guess, develop my career in the future based on that knowledge, really.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we'll go ahead and start wrapping up and getting to the picks. Gant, can you go first? Do you have any picks?
Yeah, absolutely. This one's going to be an old one wrapped back around. First off, I just want to say that there's a React Native newsletter that goes out, and it's helped by Nader, among many, many other people. If you're not on the newsletter, then you're missing out on just basically a bi-monthly, or I'm not sure which word means twice a month. Either that means every 2 months or that means twice a month. But every twice a month, reactnative.cc. We got a lot of people contributing. Originally, a lot of people might remember Brent Batney is a person who used to actually have to do all the work. Now he actually contributes to it, but doesn't have to get involved in the images and all the other stuff. So we have a nice team of people who kind of add to that. And I think that you should all sign up if you're not already signed up. Additionally, I have just as a second part of the pick here, I have I'll be speaking at several conferences this year, and so I just recently found out about codercruise.com, jazzcon.tech, and React Amsterdam. So if any of you will be at any of those conferences, be sure to look for me. I love sitting down and speaking with developers, as you can obviously tell, because that's why we're on this podcast. So those conferences, as well as definitely continuing to get news, as well as most of the podcasts here, in case you missed them, they're also listed on the newsletter. So it can kind of help do a 2-track system to make sure you keep all the information on what's going on in React and React Native.
I'll also be at React Amsterdam. I'll point out here. So if you're at React Amsterdam, also come find me. I might as well just go ahead with my picks. I'm at a ton of conferences this year. I tried to dial it down to specifically only React conferences, but it turns out there's a lot of React conferences by now. So I'll be at React London, React Conf in SF, and React Europe, and React Amsterdam. So if you're at any of those, just come find me, come talk to me. I love meeting new people, and I love meeting, if you know me, I love meeting people I've met before as well, obviously. And then my second pick is my blog. I've started writing a new article every single week about some topic related to probably JavaScript or open source or React or, just things that I think about. So definitely go check that out. It's at mxsdbr.blog. Yeah, that's the full domain, mxsdbr.blog. It's pretty cool. And I also do a weekly newsletter where you get, some links and my, a bit of personal news and also the article, of course. Yeah.
Okay, my picks, I have 2 picks today. The first one is a blog post. It's called RxJS, 6 operators that you must know. If you're looking to kind of get into RxJS or you've looked at it before and been confused, this is a really good post to kind of go to or go back to. It kind of gives you kind of the main operators that you use when using RxJS. And if you can kind of wrap your head around these, it helped me kind of understand the RxJS framework and in general. So that's a Medium post, and it's called RxJS, 6 operators that you must know, and we'll link to that in the notes. My other pick is Ionic finally released their version 2.0, final version. I always like Ionic. It's a really interesting project with a lot of great people that work there, and I think 2.0 is really great. So if you want to kind of get some other ideas about how you can build your mobile apps using JavaScript, definitely check that out.
There's one more pick that I want to say, which is that Spectacle 2.0 was released last week. So Spectacle, for those of you who don't know, is a presentation framework in React. So you can write your presentations in React instead of making them in Keynote. It's awesome. And Spectacle version 2.0 is even better. So that's definitely keep an eye out for that and use it for your next presentations.
+1 on Spectacle. Spectacle is awesome. So.
And also Spectacle version 3 will use styled components, which is pretty cool.
Oh, cool. Okay, so that wraps up episode 53 of React Native Radio. Max, thank you so much for joining us on the show today and taking the time out of your schedule for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. This was an awesome conversation.
Awesome, definitely. We hope to have you back.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week or 2 weeks from now.